I once believed that love could save everything. That if I were just good enough, patient enough, selfless enough, he would eventually understand. He'd look at me the way he used to. But as it turns out, some wedding rings aren't commitments. They're chains. I didn't know that afternoon under the blazing Texas sun when I stepped out of that black SUV with my baby girl in my arms. I was about to become a shadow in my own life. No one said it out loud. But every glance, every half-hearted laugh, every lifeless touch, said it all. What I never expected was that the final blow would come from the same man who once bent down to kiss my forehead on our wedding day 3 years ago. It was an early September day, the sky a faded blue and the heat sticky, the kind of weather you can only find in a small town near Austin, where my sister-in-law Natalie was hosting her grand lakeside wedding. Everything was white and pale gold, from the silk ribbons tied around the chairs, to the bouquet in Natalie's hands as she walked down the aisle to the sound of violins. She looked like a princess straight out of a bridal magazine. I held my daughter, Grace, just 6 months old, doing my best to keep the long beige maxi dress Ethan had picked from trailing in the damp grass. Beside me was Ethan, my husband, handsome in a deep navy suit, collar stiff as stone, eyes colder than I remembered. He looked perfect, as always. Except, Ethan hadn't looked at me even once since we stepped out of the car. I didn't want to go. Grace was teething, crying all night. I was sleep-deprived, aching, my nursing bra damp with milk. But Ethan was firm. No drama, Sarah, this is Natalie's day, you need to look good, be presentable, don't embarrass me. So I came. Hair tied up, soft lipstick, my face masked in thick foundation. I'd practiced my smile in the mirror all morning to look as okay as possible. We were seated in the front row, just behind the groom's parents. Ethan leaned over to whisper something to the man next to him and laughed. I reached for his hand under the table, gently, just a subtle, affectionate touch. But Ethan pulled away like I'd handed him a snake. Then he leaned in, his voice sharp and ice-cold against my ear. Don't make a scene. Today, you're just the baby carrier. Look good, shut up, and stay out of the way. I froze. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. But no. His eyes told the rest. I was invisible. Disposable. In the way. A wave of dizziness hit me, my ears ringing. I let out a quiet laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was the only reflex left in me to survive that moment. Like if I laughed softly enough, no one would notice my heart had just cracked open. I looked around. The other women, the wives with perfectly styled hair and painted nails, smiling, holding their husbands' hands. Had any of them ever been called a baby carrier? Had any of them ever been reduced to that in their own lives? Grace stirred in my arms, her tiny fingers clinging to the chain around my neck like an anchor keeping me from drifting completely. I kissed her forehead, hiding my face behind my loosened hair. I couldn't cry, not here, not in front of his whole family. Not when I knew Ethan was watching me with eyes colder than anything I'd ever seen in him. I used to think Ethan loved me, truly. When we met at a tech conference when I was 27, he was the first person who made me feel like I mattered. But now? I'm not sure I matter to anyone at all. Except Grace? Ethan leaned back in his seat, adjusted his tie, scrolled briefly through his phone, then slipped it back in his pocket without ever looking at me again. I sat there like a ghost, in the middle of a lavish wedding, surrounded by laughter and clinking champagne glasses. Just me, and my baby girl. And the phrase baby carrier, echoing in my mind like a curse. The music softened after the cake cutting, glasses clinked under the blood-orange sunset. I was rocking Grace, trying to lull her to sleep amidst the overwhelming noise of the outdoor reception. The scent of perfume, wine, grilled meats, and something more. Hypocrisy, hung in the air like a fog. I couldn't breathe through. Natalie beamed, hand in hand with her new husband. The crowd applauded their first dance. Ethan stood near the table, swirling a glass of white wine, deep in animated conversation with men in gray suits, not even glancing at me. I was about to slip away, quietly search for a calm corner for Grace, when a voice rang out from the stage. And now a few words from family for the bride and groom, Natalie's sister-in-law, Sarah. Would you like to say something? I froze. Not everyone looked at me. But Ethan did. And that look was like a blade of ice. You don't need to say anything, he said, smiling with his lips, not his eyes. No one wants to hear you ramble. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, a warning. A noose tightening invisibly around my neck. I stared at him for one long second, then turned, handed Grace to Ethan's cousin nearby, and walked up to the stage. My hands were freezing as I gripped the microphone. My heart pounded like it wanted to tear out of my chest. But I smiled. A small smile, just enough to be proper. Just enough to lower their guard. Thank you for letting me speak. Honestly, I didn't prepare anything, but sometimes it's the unplanned things that are the most real. A few polite chuckles scattered across the room. I looked down and saw Natalie tilt her head with a warm smile. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight, waiting for me to ruin something. I took a deep breath. I remember my wedding 3 years ago, I said, my voice still calm, but my grip on the microphone tightened. I thought I was marrying the man who understood me better than anyone. I believed that when I was tired, he'd hold my hand. When I was scared, he'd whisper that everything would be okay. But I paused, looking directly at Ethan. He raised an eyebrow, gave a faint smirk, and turned to the person next to him, as if this story had nothing to do with him. I went on, but this time my voice dropped, colder. But the truth is, in some marriages, the woman isn't a partner. She's a possession, a decorative object that knows when to smile, a baby machine that stays silent when hurt. The whole room seemed to freeze. I could hear a spoon clink against a glass, someone swallowing hard, and my heart pounding like war drums in my ears. I used to think that if I sacrificed enough, love would return. I was wrong. I lived 3 years as a shadow, forcing a smile through the hurt, holding back tears through the neglect, trying to believe I still mattered, even after being called a baby machine. I didn't need to say who said it. No one here was stupid enough not to guess. And today I stand here not to cause a scene, but to remind, I turned to Natalie, that marriage is not a performance. It's about seeing each other, even when the other person is tired, messy, ugly, and imperfect. Because if you stop seeing, stop listening, then marriage becomes nothing more than a show. A cold, toxic act. I handed the mic back to the host, not waiting for applause, not seeking approval. I walked down in silence, each step heavy but firm. All eyes followed me, then parted like waves. Grace was asleep, her head resting on Ethan's cousin's shoulder. I took her in my arms, holding her tight, like holding the last unbroken piece of my heart. Ethan didn't stand. He didn't speak. He just glared at me like I was the enemy emerging from the shadows. But for the first time, I didn't feel small under that look anymore. We left the party early, no one stopped us, no one said goodbye. And when the car door slammed shut behind me, I knew something inside me had shattered. And something else had begun to form. Something new. Something still unclear, but it was a beginning. A question that echoed in my mind the whole ride home. If this isn't love, then what am I still here for? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. I stood there holding a mug of coffee, my back aching from a sleepless night. Grace murmured softly from the crib, her tiny hands waving in the air as if catching something in a dream. I was still in my faded nightgown, hair messily tied up, hadn't brushed my teeth. But what chilled me wasn't exhaustion. It was how Ethan walked in as if last night never happened. He opened the fridge, poured milk into a glass, took a sip and checked his phone for news. Not a glance at me. Not a word. Not a single question about the baby. Or me. Just a normal Sunday morning in his mind. "So you're just going to stay silent?" I asked. My voice hoarse from not speaking all morning. Ethan didn't look up. "What's there to say?" I gripped the mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You heard what I said last night." "I did," he said, finally looking up, his eyes sharp as razors. "And you made me look like a clown in front of my entire family." I scoffed. "I just told the truth. If the truth makes you feel ridiculous, maybe you should look at yourself." He slammed the glass onto the table. "Stop playing the victim, Sarah. You chose to stand there. You chose to air out shameful things. You made a fool of yourself." I didn't answer. I turned away. Not out of weakness, but because I knew we no longer spoke the same language. That afternoon, my mother-in-law, Marilyn, came by as scheduled. She wore a deep wine-colored silk robe, her perfume overpowering, and her sharp eyes scanned every corner of the house like she was inspecting for dust. She looked at me, frowning. "You look tired, Sarah. No makeup? Being a mom doesn't mean neglecting yourself." I gave a polite smile and replied. "Grace is teething. Didn't sleep all night. I think she needs a miracle more than I need mascara." She didn't laugh. "About your speech yesterday. It was very special." She emphasized the last word with a silky, smooth sarcasm wrapped in velvet. "A lot of people were surprised, some uncomfortable." Ethan sat across from me. Didn't defend me. Didn't intervene. Just glanced at me. Then went back to his phone. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "I just think, if you're unhappy with something, you should talk to your husband. Not stand in the middle of someone else's wedding acting like you're the lead in some tragic play." I froze for a few seconds, looked at her, then at Ethan. Both were trying to shove me back into the perfect picture frame they'd built, the agreeable wife, who knew how to keep her mouth shut and protect the family's image. I placed the bottle in Grace's mouth and took a deep breath. "I only said what's true. If someone finds it bleak, maybe it's a truth they just don't want to admit." Marilyn tightened her grip on her purse, tilted her head, and gave a faint smile. "Sometimes the truth needs to be managed, Sarah. A smart woman knows when to speak, not when people are holding wine glasses and eating wedding cake." The days that followed were a terrifying kind of silence. Ethan left early for work, came home late, didn't hold the baby, didn't ask how I was. He only spoke in short, clipped phrases, never more than 5 words. "Where's the bottle? We're low on diapers. Don't forget to wash the blankets." Every time Grace cried in the middle of the night, I carried her back and forth in the dark, my back aching like it might split in two. I tried to remember the last time Ethan soothed her. Maybe. Never. He said he didn't want to do it wrong. But the truth was, he never even tried. One night, after I'd just finished changing Grace's diaper, I walked into the living room and saw Ethan sitting on the couch, staring at the TV screen, where the wedding was playing on repeat. The exact moment I gave my speech. I stood behind him, silent. "You think you're the hero in this story, don't you?" he said, eyes still glued to the screen. "You think one speech is enough to change everything?" I crossed my arms. No, but it was the first time I heard myself tell the truth, in 3 years. He laughed, a cold, drawn-out laugh. "You're not going anywhere. You have nothing, no money, no job, no support. You need me, and you know it." I didn't reply, because I knew, to him, silence meant agreement. But this time, I was silent to remember. To remember? I needed to prepare. I started paying attention to every small detail. Marilyn's passive-aggressive jabs every time she visited. The way Ethan shut his laptop the moment I walked into a room. The phone calls he abruptly ended when I got close. I could feel it. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was the help. With a baby. One morning, while cleaning, I found a crumpled note in Ethan's coat pocket, a list of expenses. Among them some strange transfers, not for the house, not for groceries. A name I had never heard before. Amanda R. I didn't ask. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood now. Every answer from him was just another layer of disguise. And I no longer wanted lies wrapped in gentle tones. I just wanted freedom. But to reach that, I had to disappear from Ethan's control. And I had already started planning. It began one night in October, when Grace finally fell asleep to the sound of ocean waves playing from the white noise machine. The house was dark. Ethan had gone to bed, his steady breathing echoing from the bedroom, as emotionless as the man himself. I sat alone in the kitchen, the old laptop humming on the table, the screen flickering as I typed the password. The startup took forever, like a weary sigh. My hands trembled slightly as I searched for Adobe Illustrator, the software that once was part of my life, before I became Grace's mom, before I became Ethan's accessory. It took over 40 minutes to download. I discreetly deleted the browsing history, renamed the install file to Baby Photos. When the icon finally appeared, I stared at it like I was seeing a piece of my old soul dug up from the ashes. I opened a new file, my hands stiff after nearly 2 years without designing. The first line I drew was a lopsided circle. But I laughed. I was back. Not to run from Ethan, but to find myself again. I found my old hard drive in a box down in the basement, the place Ethan never bothered to go near. Inside were logo sketches for coffee shops, websites for bakeries, tiny ad campaigns I used to work on back when I freelanced. Those things used to be my pride. Now they were just forgotten memories, buried under his words. I make enough, you don't need to work. I clenched my teeth and began typing out profiles again on Upwork, Fiverr, all the old freelance platforms I once used. My profile photo was an old one, from before Grace. Back when I still knew how to apply red lipstick without trembling. I rewrote my bio. Experienced graphic designer, past work includes collaborations with various local brands, currently seeking small projects with flexible deadlines. No mention of my child. No mention of being kept at home. Just a woman who wanted to work, to earn. Quietly. 3 days later I got my first message. A woman named Jenna, based in Seattle, was opening a handmade candle shop and needed a logo. She offered $40. I nearly cried over that $40. I worked at night, after Grace had fallen asleep. The glow of the screen on my tired face felt like a reminder. You're still alive. I drew tiny flames, soft outlines. Sent over rough drafts along with an apology if it didn't match her vision. Jenna replied, "It's beautiful, you really understood what I wanted, thank you so much." I read that message over and over. No one had thanked me in months. No one had complimented me on anything. In Ethan's world, I was just the one who took out the trash, warmed bottles, folded clothes. But here, I was someone who created something of value. I transferred the $40 to a new bank account I'd opened, under my maiden name, the one Ethan didn't know about. That account became the seed of my freedom. I started staying up later, took on another project designing labels for an organic tea brand. Then a landing page for a startup in Denver. They were small gigs, but every time a client sent feedback, it felt like getting a transfusion. During the day, I lived like usual. Still made coffee for Ethan, still nodded when Marilyn said Grace looked just like her father, still played the silent wife. But every night, when the whole house fell asleep, I came alive again. One day, while organizing my design folders, I stumbled on an old file, a logo I'd done for a furniture brand back when I was single. I used to dream of starting my own design agency. Ethan once said, "I'll invest in you when I have time." He never did. What he invested in was control. I wrote out a list, not a list of escape, but a list of revival. Open, separate bank account. Reinstall software. Work every night. Reset old email password. Look for part-time daycare. Find one-bedroom apartment under $950/month. Update resume. Each item I checked off was another thing Ethan couldn't touch. One Wednesday afternoon, Ethan came home earlier than usual. I was folding laundry. He stood leaning in the doorway, watching me like he'd just figured something out. "You look busy these days." I nodded. "Yeah, lots to do." He stepped closer, picked up a piece of paper from the table. My printed list. Though, I'd cleverly titled it Grace's vaccination schedule. "So thorough," he said, smiling. But it wasn't a gentle smile. It was the smile of someone who knew too much and was waiting to see what you'd do next. I didn't respond. I looked him straight in the eyes. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't blink. That night, I worked until 2 a.m. finishing a design package for a mental health blog. When I sent off the final files, I included a simple message. "I understand what it feels like to be buried in silence. I'm honored to help you find your voice again." I didn't just send that to the client. I sent it to myself. At 3 a.m. I was still in front of my laptop, eyes burning with fatigue, but my hands hadn't stopped moving. Grace slept peacefully in the crib next to my desk, her tiny arms wrapped around a stuffed bunny. The next project was nearing its deadline, a brand identity kit for a startup in Arizona. Nothing glamorous, but they paid on time and the founder respected my work. Simple words like, "Great job," and "This is exactly what I wanted," were things I hadn't heard in years. Each message was a thread, stitching me back together. And then, that message arrived. A notification from Facebook Messenger. The name flashing on the screen stunned me for a moment. Rachel Morelli's. My best friend from college. The one who used to pull all-nighters with me to finish our senior project. The one I once dreamed of starting a design firm with in San Francisco. "Sarah, I just saw your name on the portfolio of a brand our company is working with." "Oh my God, is that really you?" "It's Rachel." I covered my mouth so I wouldn't wake Grace. My heart fluttered like a child being called on stage. "I'm still alive," I texted back with a laughing emoji. "Freelancing at midnight in the kitchen with a 6-month-old. Rachel replied almost immediately. "My company's looking for a freelance designer to support the creative team. Remote work, flexible hours. Are you interested? I can recommend you." I stared at that message. A simple question. But it felt like a door opening to an entirely new universe. An invitation. An opportunity. A lifeline offered right as I teetered on the edge. "I'm very interested, please do, Rachel." 4 days later, I had a Zoom interview with the design team lead, a woman named Marla, around 40, sharp, straightforward. She didn't ask why I hadn't worked in 2 years. She didn't dig into my personal life, she simply asked, "When designing a logo, what matters most to you?" I answered without hesitation. "Emotion." "A beautiful design without feeling is like a song without sound." She smiled. "That's a great answer." That night I received the email. "We're thrilled to welcome you to our design team as a freelance project contributor." When I read those words, I broke down crying. Not because I was weak, but because, for the first time, I had found an exit, not through a window, but through my keyboard. I used the money I received to place a deposit on a separate debit card, then transferred the rest into a savings account Ethan didn't know existed. I opened a new Google Drive folder and named it Blue House Plan. My escape plan. I started searching for one-bedroom apartments within 10 miles of Rachel's workplace, just in case a full-time offer ever came through. I looked up part-time daycare centers with tuition under $700/month that offered support for single moms. Everything was saved, labeled, and bookmarked. Each evening, I played the role of the indifferent wife. But every night, I became a woman quietly building a new world in the shadows. And I had the most important thing. Hope. But then Ethan started noticing. One evening while I was feeding Grace, he sat across from me, resting his chin on his hand like an interrogator. "You've been busy lately." I nodded. "Yeah, picked up a few small design gigs, just passing time." He smirked. I thought you gave up that line of work? I never gave it up, it was just paused. He narrowed his eyes, glancing from my hands to the open laptop nearby. How much are you making? Not much, just enough to buy formula for Grace without having to ask you for every single dollar. A heavy silence fell between us. He leaned forward on the table. What are you trying to prove, Sarah? I'm reclaiming the part of me that I lost. It has nothing to do with you. Ethan said nothing. But 2 days later his mother unexpectedly called me, her voice sugary sweet. Sarah, I heard from Richard that you've been a bit stressed lately. Are you sure going back to work is the right thing? I'm worried it might affect Grace. I swallowed my anger, kept my voice light. Don't worry, Mom. Grace is sleeping well, eating well, and smiling all day. My job isn't hurting her. She paused for a few seconds. It's just, you should let Richard take care of things. That's the man's role. I let out a soft laugh. The problem is, he hasn't been taking care of anything. And I've waited long enough. A week later, I noticed a strange app on my phone. Gray icon labeled System Update. When I opened it, nothing showed. But in the settings, I found it had access to location, microphone, even messages. I deleted it immediately. That night, I checked Grace's backpack, the one where I kept a folder of important documents. It was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I just smiled. Because I had already seen it coming. I reprinted every document, backed up all emails, stored them in a zip bag and hid it at the bottom of an old cookie tin in the kitchen cabinet. I bought a new USB drive and encrypted it with a private password. Ethan's grip around me was tightening, but this time, I wasn't struggling. I was quietly prying off each of his fingers. I was preparing for my rise. Ever since discovering the tracking app on my phone, I no longer had doubts. Ethan didn't just want to control me. He wanted to know my every move before I even made it. I sat in the car, Grace dozing off in the back seat, her head tilted to one side, mouth slightly open. It was drizzling outside and I was trembling, not from the cold, but from the tension. I dialed the number of a women's center I'd found on a private forum for single mothers. My name is Sarah, I have a small child and I think I need help, not with physical abuse. It's about control. Emotional control. I'm planning to leave. My voice was quiet but clear. The woman on the other end, her name was Lynn, didn't ask why I wasn't leaving right away. She didn't push me to call the police. She just said, "We have emergency financial aid, legal counseling, and temporary housing. The most important thing right now is, you need to be safe. And you need evidence." I started building a system to hide information, right inside the house, where I was being trapped. Proof of income? I printed every PayPal invoice, folded them up small, wrapped them in plastic and tucked them under the fabric lining of a tissue box in the bathroom. Screenshots of conversations? I saved them on a thumb-sized USB and stuffed it inside an old baby bottle with the bottom cut out. Schedule? I wrote it backward on the backs of daycare flyers, then clipped them into Grace's baby food books. I bought a cheap burner phone with cash and hid it in a Ziploc bag stuck to the back of the diaper box. All calls to the women's center, daycare and the lawyer's office went through that phone. Ethan had no idea. I also opened another bank account at a branch nearly 40 minutes from home. I used an old driver's license with an updated address, paid everything in cash, left no online trace. Every dollar from freelance work went there. I didn't buy anything extravagant, gave him no reason to be suspicious. Each night I performed flawlessly. Dinner on time, house clean, laundry smelling fresh. I smiled when Ethan talked about work. I acted like I was still sweet, obedient Sarah, the kind of wife who would never dare leave her husband's side. But inside, I was calculating every move like a game of life or math chess. One night, Ethan walked into the room while I was rocking Grace to sleep. He stood at the doorway, silently. I turned around, startled by his expression. Not angry, not mocking, but suspicious? "You've been a little too calm lately," he said slowly. Yeah, I'm trying to find some balance. You don't snap anymore. Don't ask questions. Don't complain. Just quiet. I gave a small smile. Maybe I'm learning to live the way you wanted. Ethan stared at me for a few more seconds, then turned and walked away. I knew in that moment he had started to feel fear. And men like Ethan, when afraid, do one of two things: tighten their grip, or burn everything down. I wasn't going to wait to find out which one he'd choose. I visited a trial daycare near the area I planned to move to. A small house with a white fence and a backyard full of wild daisies. The woman running it, Rosa, a Mexican woman in her 50s, had eyes as warm as my mother's. When I brought Grace in, she immediately crawled toward the colorful toys. She's so bright, Rosa said, picking Grace up like they'd known each other forever. She's the only reason I'm still standing, I whispered. I asked about hours, pricing, emergency procedures, privacy. Rosa nodded and handed me a form. You just sign when you're ready. Don't worry. We don't ask about the past. I stepped back into my car, closed the door and sat in the parking lot for 10 more minutes. Not out of hesitation, but because, for the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't look like a black hole. That night, when I got home, I found Ethan sitting at the dining table typing on his laptop. He looked up when I walked in. You were out all day. Grocery run. Took Grace for a little walk. He stared at me like he could see through my skin. You planning to go somewhere without telling me? I placed the grocery bag on the table and pulled out a bottle of milk and a box of cereal. I'm right here. There's nothing right here about you anymore, he said, his voice dropping. You're hiding something, I know it. And I will find out. I looked at him, didn't flinch. Then you better hurry up, Richard, because by the time you find it, I might already be gone. That night, I reprinted every document, evidence that Ethan had been monitoring me, my private income, daycare forms, even my moving plan. I stuffed them into an envelope, wrapped it in 3 layers of plastic, tucked it into an old freezer bag, and hid it in the bottom freezer drawer, behind a box of frozen beef Ethan hated. I knew I didn't have much time left, but I also knew I was almost ready. 3:14 a.m. The house was drowned in darkness. The only sound was the low hum of the heater and Ethan's steady breathing from the other room. I sat on the edge of the bed, unable to sleep all night, my mind spinning, hands gripping the diaper bag strap like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. Grace was asleep in her crib, her tiny face so peaceful, like the world had never touched her with harm. I bent down and kissed her forehead, then gently wrapped her in the old gray fleece blanket she loved most. The warmth of her small body was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I stepped out of the room like a shadow, making no sound. The hallway light was off, only the faint green glow of the microwave clock lit the kitchen wall. I was ready. Food bag, milk, documents, burner phone. All packed neatly in the trunk of the car, hours earlier. My hand trembled as I turned the key in the back door lock. Each tiny click echoed in my head like a bomb going off. I pictured Ethan jolting awake, rushing out, grabbing me. But nothing happened. No one moved. No shouting. Just complete silence. I held Grace tight to my chest and stepped onto the back porch, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. The wind was sharp, stinging harder than fear. My heart pounded so fast it ached. I had never seen a night this dark, not because of the lack of light, but because I was doing something I couldn't undo. The car was already unlocked. I placed Grace in her car seat, strapped her in under the dim light, then climbed into the driver's seat. My hands were ice cold as I turned the key, engine humming quietly to life. Just then, the porch light flicked on. I froze. Ethan. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and there he was, standing in a thin t-shirt, barefoot, eyes locked on my car. He didn't move, didn't shout, just stared. I didn't wait another second. My foot slammed the gas pedal. The car rolled forward, tires skidding slightly on the damp driveway. I didn't dare look back. Every street in the familiar neighborhood passed by like scenes from a film I'd once starred in, but had now been written out of. Traffic lights flipped between red and yellow, but I didn't stop. My heart thundered like a war drum. I clenched my jaw to stay focused. Every tree shadow, every oncoming headlight made me flinch. I imagined Ethan tailing me, ready to force my car off the road. But no one was there. Just my fear chasing me down. 4:43 a.m., I arrived at the Women's Center. A low beige building surrounded by brittle trees. Winter arriving early. A woman stood waiting at the door. Not Rosa from daycare, but another Rosa. Same name, different life. Gray-streaked hair, eyes deep and calm like still water. I opened the car door and lifted a still sleeping Grace into my arms. My feet moved like I was sleepwalking. Rosa asked nothing. She simply opened the door, ushered me in, locked it behind us, and said, "Your room is on the second floor. There's a lock inside. This morning you'll meet with a legal advisor, but right now, you need rest." I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak even a thank you. The room was small, painted a soft blue, with a single bed, a small dresser, and a baby crib. I laid Grace down. She nestled into the pillow like she already sensed this was a safe place. I sat at the edge of the bed, my body weightless, as if I'd just unloaded a 3-year burden from my chest. I didn't know what would happen next. What the court would say. What lies Ethan would tell. Whether I would lose custody. I had no answers. But right now, in this quiet room, without angry footsteps, without piercing stares, without that blade-sharp voice, I knew one thing for sure. I had left hell. I curled up, not lying down, just resting my head against the wall, eyes half closed. This darkness wasn't frightening. It was gentle. It gave me shelter. It whispered, "You did it, Sarah, you really did." From the crib, Grace breathed softly, steadily. I reached in, gently wrapped my fingers around her tiny hand, and my tears spilled onto the back of it. I bowed my head and whispered 3 words. Not for Ethan, not for the court, not for the outside world, but just for me and my little girl. We are free. 2 weeks after I carried Grace out of that suffocating house, I stood in front of the mirror at the shelter, straightening my dress collar and smoothing the sleeves. My hair was tied up neatly, lips touched with a soft nude shade. Not to hide fear, but to declare to the world that I was back. That evening, I was invited to a small family gathering hosted by Thomas, Ethan's cousin, as a makeup event for those who couldn't attend Natalie's wedding. When Thomas called to invite me, I hesitated. But then he said, "Sarah, your speech at Natalie's wedding, people still talk about it. This time it's just a quiet evening. If you feel ready, we'd love to hear from you again." I nodded, not because I wanted to relive the pain, but because I needed to hear the voice I once buried. The dinner was held at a small lakeside restaurant. Warm yellow lights hung from the ceiling like tiny stars. The air smelled of wood and a hint of vanilla. Grace stayed with Rosa for the night. She didn't ask questions, just held my hand and said, "Go, you need to stand in the light." As I walked in, many familiar faces turned toward me. Some smiled, some looked uneasy, but no one avoided me. A few light hugs, short questions, "How have you been? Are you okay?" All stopped at safe distances. No one touched the truth of what had happened. At the end of the room, Ethan stood, hands in pockets, leaning against the wall, face like stone. He looked at me with the same stare that used to make me tremble. But tonight, it meant nothing. I walked straight to the head table where Thomas stood holding the mic. He smiled and handed it to me. "No one speaks truth like you. If you feel like saying something, now's the time." I took the mic and stepped forward. The room quieted. Every eye turned to me. In the soft light, I was no longer the broken wife. No longer the invisible baby machine. But someone rising from the ashes. I didn't need notes, everything was already in my heart. I know some of you may be wondering where I went, why I left the family I was once part of, whether the rumors are true, that I lost control. Some people glanced at each other. A soft cough echoed from the corner. Ethan remained still, expressionless. I looked directly at him. Richard says I was paranoid, that I left because I wasn't stable enough to be a mother, a wife. But I'll say this clearly and publicly so he doesn't have to whisper behind my back anymore. I didn't leave because I lost my mind. I left because I finally found it. No one laughed. No one clapped. Just silence. The kind that makes people listen with their hearts. I continued. I didn't leave because I stopped loving. I left because I learned something I should have known long ago. When someone no longer sees you as a human being, you have the right to take back your soul. I'm not a decoration. I'm not a milk machine. I'm not a silent wall absorbing the rage of a man who calls himself head of the household. A whisper behind me, oh my God. I didn't care. I lived for 3 years like a ghost, quietly enduring, hoping one day silence would be exchanged for love. But I was wrong. Silence only makes people believe you've lost your worth. And I'm tired of being invisible in my own life. I paused, took a breath. Tonight I stand here not to complain, not to blame, but to say one thing. I chose to leave, and it was the bravest decision of my life. I chose to save myself. I chose to love myself. More than I chose to keep someone else comfortable, who stopped loving me a long time ago. I looked toward the back of the room. Ethan still hadn't moved, but his jaw was tight, his face red, out of anger, or shame, or both. But I didn't stop. I don't know what the upcoming legal battles will look like. I know I'll face accusations, judgment, even betrayal. But I'm ready. Because now, I'm no longer the woman who stays silent. I'm Grace's mother. I'm a designer back on her path. I'm a woman who knows her worth. And I will never lose it again. I bowed slightly, returned the mic, no applause. But I didn't need it. I left the stage and walked straight to the door. As I passed Ethan, I paused for just a beat. He looked at me, eyes narrowing as if calculating his next strike. But I said one sentence. Soft enough for him to hear, sharp enough to stick. This is the last time I walk past you. Next time, I'll walk right over you. I didn't look back. Outside the air was cool, the night still deep, but this time I walked in my own light. From Sarah's story, I learned that not all wounds bleed. Some come from silence, from emotional control, from becoming invisible in your own life. But from that same place, I understood that courage doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it's the quiet act of a woman carrying her child out of darkness and into the light. Freedom begins the moment you choose yourself, even if the world turns away. What do you think of Sarah's journey? Would you have done the same in her situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life. I received the letter on a Tuesday morning in October, while making coffee in my small apartment in Tacoma. The ivory envelope, stamped with the logo of some law firm I'd never heard of, sent a chill through my palm before I even opened it. The name, Michael T. Grayson, my biological father, was printed in bold at the top. The man who had vanished from my life when I was 8. My name is Audrey. I'm 31 years old. And I haven't heard a single apology from him in the past 23 years. When I tore open the envelope, my hands were trembling like I was signing my own sentence. The paper was thick, the black lettering cold and formal. We regret to inform you that Mr. Michael T. Grayson passed away on October 2nd. The will reading will be held on Friday at the office of Whitaker and Lane, Seattle. I froze. A part of me had already believed he'd died long ago. In memory, in spirit. But this time it was real. He was gone. And somehow, still managed to leave behind one last mess. Like a farewell gift. "What's wrong, Audrey? You've gone pale," said Rachel, my best friend, from the kitchen, holding half a slice of toast. I handed her the letter silently. She scanned it quickly and looked up. "Grayson? That's your dad?" I nodded. "He's dead. And I'm invited to the will reading." "You're actually going?" Rachel frowned, anger rising in her voice. "After everything he did?" I let out a dry laugh. "What exactly is everything?" "He didn't fight. He didn't call. No letters, not a single dime in support. The last time I saw him was on my 8th birthday. He gave me a teddy bear, then left." Rachel sat across from me. "So why go?" I glanced back down at the letter. "I don't know, maybe to look his new family in the eyes? His new wife? 2 new kids? Maybe I need to hear him deny me one last time, this time from the grave." That afternoon my mom called. Her voice was brittle. "Did you get the letter?" "Yeah. When did you find out?" 3 days ago. I saw the obituary in the local section." She paused. "Are you planning to go?" I didn't respond right away. My head was spinning with questions I couldn't answer. "I'm not going for the money," I finally said. "I just want to know if he ever thought about me." My mom sighed. "Audrey, some questions are better left unanswered." I stayed silent. On Friday morning, I wore a dark gray pantsuit, pulled my hair back neatly. Not to impress, but to armor up. Like stepping into a battlefield. The downtown Seattle office building shimmered with glass and steel. I stepped into the elevator, gripping my handbag like it carried every remaining piece of my childhood. When the conference room doors opened, I saw them, the 3 people who had replaced me in my father's life. A woman around 50 in an expensive cream dress. A young man with a cold stare. A girl younger than him who looked at me as if I didn't belong there. Whitaker, the older attorney, stood up to greet me. "Ms. Audrey Keller, please, have a seat." I nodded, avoiding eye contact with the others. "Now that everyone is here," he said, flipping open a thick folder, "let's begin." I sat across from them, my hands clenched into fists beneath the table. I had prepared for anything, yet a silent fear still surged through me. Eliza Grayson, the woman my father chose after my mother, sat with the 2 children he raised as his own. Thomas, about 25, sharp-featured with eyes like blades, and Lily, barely 20, dressed like she'd stepped out of a high-end TV drama. All 3 looked at me, like I was an ink stain on the crisp white linen of their polished mourning. Attorney Whitaker cleared his throat and opened the file. "This is the official last will and testament of Mr. Michael T. Grayson, signed on July 18th of this year." I remained silent, my heart beating in cold, steady thuds. "In this document Mr. Grayson declares, I leave all real estate, stocks, liquid assets and personal investments to my 2 children, Thomas and Lily Grayson, to be divided equally." My brow furrowed. Whitaker's voice continued, but my ears started ringing. The name Audrey didn't appear. Not a mention, not a footnote, not even a hint that he had a daughter living just an hour away. Whitaker closed the folder. "That concludes the primary contents of the will, unless there are any questions." "Wait," my voice came out sharper than I intended. "Are you absolutely sure there's no appendix? No clause, nothing else?" Whitaker looked up. "I'm afraid not, Miss Keller. The will is very clear." Thomas chuckled under his breath, the sound hollow and echoing. "You came here expecting a piece of it? After all these years?" Lily glanced at me, her lips curled, like she'd just spotted trash on a leather chair. "He never even mentioned you." I gripped my bag tightly, nails digging into the strap. "Really? Then what about the pictures? The park trips? The birthday videos with him behind the camera?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Maybe his memory was erased the day he married your mom." Eliza, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "He wasn't perfect, But Michael kept what served him. What didn't, he discarded. Whitaker exhaled. If there are no legal objections, I'll adjourn this reading. I stood up. This isn't about legality, it's about the truth, and I intend to find it. No one replied. They didn't need to. To them, I had never existed. Outside the building, I called my mother. She wasn't surprised. I figured, she said. He left you out, didn't he? I nodded, wiping away tears that had come uninvited. Not a word, like I was never part of him. I kept everything, Audrey. Photos, letters, even clippings. If you really want the truth, come home. We'll start from the beginning. That evening, I drove 3 hours to Spokane. When I opened the door to my childhood home, the same one I'd left after college, Mom was sitting in the living room surrounded by 3 neatly arranged cardboard boxes. Her expression softened when she saw me, though I could still see the quiet anger at the corners of her mouth. I spent the whole afternoon going through these, she said, pulling one box closer. Remember those letters your father wrote during the first year after the divorce? I never mailed them, but he did write them. I opened a yellowed envelope. His familiar handwriting slanted and steady. Dear Audrey, I'm sorry. I drew a sharp breath. Beneath it was a photo of him holding me as a baby. On the back, in blue ink, the day I knew I could love, for real. I looked up, my eyes met my mother's. Something changed him, Audrey. He didn't walk away for no reason. Maybe someone, or something, made him choose. I didn't respond. But deep down I knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the first crack in everything I thought I knew about the past. I sat in the middle of the old living room, soft yellow light spilling over handwritten letters and time-worn photographs. Every piece of paper, every stroke of my father's handwriting stabbed at the same question. If he truly loved me, how could he let me grow up under the weight of such brutal silence? My mother carefully turned the pages of an old photo album, her hands trembling slightly as she paused at a picture of my father holding me at the beach. That summer, she said quietly. He called you the only light in the chaos of his life. He wasn't perfect, but he did love you, deeply. Until the doorbell cut her off. I glanced at her. I didn't call anyone. She went to answer it. A middle-aged man stood at the porch in a black shirt and long coat. He removed his glasses and nodded politely. Hello. I'm Charles Melton. I was Michael Grayson's private attorney. I stood, tension bristling across my shoulders. Why are you here? There's something Mr. Grayson left for you, he said, his voice gravelly like it had weathered decades of hard negotiations. He came to my office 3 months ago, requesting a new will. One that included your name. But, he paused, his expression darkening. He died before it could be finalized. I took a half step back. So, I was meant to be added to the will? Yes, but legally it never took effect. However, he continued, opening a weathered brown leather case. He left a USB drive and a handwritten letter, instructing me to give them to you if anything happened unexpectedly. My mother covered her mouth. Michael! He was planning for this. I took the USB drive. It felt heavier than any piece of hardware I'd ever held. Mr. Grayson insisted only you view the contents, Charles said. I never opened it, but he warned, if it falls into the wrong hands, the consequences could be severe. I thanked him and plugged it into my laptop immediately. The screen lit up. Hundreds of files appeared. Emails, audio recordings, internal memos, financial documents, all flagged in red. I opened a folder labeled CHN Confessional. The first lines stole my breath. Evidence of embezzlement, abuse of power, and financial manipulation by Charles H. Grayson, my father-in-law and current CEO of Grayson Holdings. I collapsed into the chair. Dad collected evidence against his own father-in-law. Eliza's father, my mom asked, her voice tight with shock. I nodded. And more. There are documents showing Charles forced Dad to transfer patents worth tens of millions of dollars, threatening to have my scholarship pulled if he refused. Mom burst into tears. So, he didn't abandon you. He was forced. I skimmed through a series of audio files. One, titled July 14th, Final Conversation, sent a chill down my spine. My father's voice, weary, resolute. If I die, I want Audrey to know everything. I won't let Charles control it all. I'll bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. Then a second voice, colder than ice. If you open your mouth, I swear it won't just be you. That girl, your ex-wife, they'll all be crushed. I slammed the laptop shut, my whole body frozen. We have to bring this out, I said, my voice raw. My mom laid a hand on my shoulder. Slowly, Audrey. If he made those threats, it means he still has power. We have to be smart. No, Mom. I've lived in silence long enough. It's time the name Audrey Keller takes its rightful place in the real history of the Grayson family. I looked out the window. Night had started to fall over the neighborhood. But inside me, a fire had been lit, brighter and fiercer than any silence could ever smother. The following afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Alone. Don't tell anyone. It was from Lily Grayson. I hesitated. Part of me thought it might be a trap. But after what I found on the USB, I knew I couldn't keep investigating alone. I replied. Haven's Corner Cafe. 6 o'clock. I arrived early, choosing a window seat. When Lily entered, she wore a gray hoodie pulled over her head, her eyes darting like someone carrying guilt. She sat down without looking at me. I know you don't trust me, she whispered. But I need you to believe this. Your father didn't just walk out of your life, he was forced to, by my grandfather. I gripped my coffee cup. I'm listening. My dad found out Charles Grayson, my grandfather, was using the company to launder money. He didn't speak up. Not at first. But eventually he started documenting everything in a journal. I found it in his office, after he died. She pulled a worn leather notebook from her bag. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. Lily pushed it toward me. Thomas knows about it too, and he'll do whatever it takes to keep it from you. My stomach dropped. You mean? And he's watching you. Maybe even my mom knows. You need to leave, now. I jumped up, Lily grabbed my wrist. Wait! There's someone who can help you. He used to work in internal accounting. His name is Derek Hoyt. My dad trusted him. I took out my phone and saved the name. Just then, the cafe door burst open. Thomas walked in, scanning every table. Go, Lily hissed. We slipped out the back, bolted through an alley, and split up at the first cross street. I sprinted into a parking lot, heart pounding. In the rearview mirror, I saw Thomas chasing Lily's direction. I drove off, clutching the journal to my chest. That night at my mother's house, I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook. Each page was a dagger. Today he demanded I sign over patent rights, said if I refused, Audrey would lose her scholarship. I didn't sign. 2 weeks later it was gone. Audrey will hate me, but if I confront him directly, he'll destroy her and her mother. Every word was proof my father fought in silence, shielding me however he could. I called Derek using the number Lily gave me. A cautious male voice answered. Who is this? This is Audrey Keller. I'm Michael Grayson's daughter. I need to talk. About Charles Grayson. 3 seconds of silence. Meet me at the Elmwood gas station, 1 a.m. Come alone. They arrived on time. Derek, a salt-and-pepper-haired man with sharp, tired eyes, tossed a thick folder onto the passenger seat. I kept this to protect myself. But if you're really Michael's daughter, I owe him. Inside were forged contracts, shady wire transfers, names of shell corporations, and Charles Grayson's signature. When Michael refused to sign these documents, Charles tightened control over his entire life. His family, his job, his finances, even his health. I think he orchestrated Michael's sudden death. I gripped the steering wheel. If I bring this forward, will he be prosecuted? Derek gave a grim smile. If you live long enough to make it happen. I drove home just as dawn broke. My mother stood on the porch, pale. Thomas came by, he ransacked the front yard. I didn't let him in. But he knows you're holding something. I handed her the journal and whispered, "Keep it safe, I have a plan." "What are you going to do, Audrey?" I met her gaze, steady. "I'm going to expose the name Grayson. But I'm not doing it alone." And I knew I needed Lily. She was the only key left in the house of lies Charles had built. Lily and I sat in the temporary apartment I rented under a false name in Auburn. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the eaves, but my mind was far louder. On the table lay my father's journal, the stack of documents Derek had handed me, and the USB drive brought by attorney Charles Melton. The final pieces of a rotten puzzle. Money laundering, illegal patent transfers, bribery of federal officials, and even evidence surrounding his death. I played the final voice memo from the digital journal for Lily. My father's voice was hoarse. "Charles said if I keep digging, he won't hesitate to make this permanent. Today I saw someone standing near the house. I'm not sure how much time I have left to finish this." Lily held her head. "You have the proof. It's clear. Why haven't you gone to the FBI?" I looked at her. "Because if we go alone, it'll be buried. Charles has people inside. The one thing he can't control, everything going public, all at once, in a place he'd never expect." "You mean?" "The emergency shareholders meeting tomorrow. They think I won't show up." We coordinated with FBI agent Mark Ellison the next morning at 8 a.m. He was one of the few Derek trusted, someone who had investigated Charles before, but was quietly removed from the case. "You're planning to reveal everything at the meeting?" Ellison asked, eyes fixed on the journal. "Yes, and I need the FBI ready. Once I speak, they'll react, either by fleeing or fighting." He nodded. "We'll have the building surrounded, but be careful. Charles doesn't lose quietly." That morning, the Grayson Holdings conference hall buzzed with overpriced suits, strained handshakes, and hollow congratulations. I walked in like a thorn in their side. And I knew it. Thomas sat in the front row, caught my eye, and smirked. The kind of smile worn by men who think they're still in control. Charles Grayson entered shortly after. He carried the same unnerving composure, though to me, he was no longer a patriarch. Just a cold mask stretched over a collapsing empire. When the meeting chair began to speak, I stood up. "I have an urgent statement regarding this company's assets, legacy, and leadership ethics," I said loudly and clearly. "My name is Audrey Keller. I'm the only daughter of the late chief engineer Michael Grayson, and today, I'm going to show you the truth." I connected my laptop to the main screen. Documents appeared: offshore bank accounts, forged patent transfers, photographs of bribe payments disguised as consulting fees, ledgers of payouts to government officials. The room fell silent, then whispers. Charles stood abruptly. "This is slander. You have no authority here." "Then how about this recording?" I asked, pressing play. "If you don't sign, I'll cut off her scholarship. She'll have no future. And if you open your mouth, the only thing left of you will be a body." Charles paled. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Thomas lunged toward the laptop, but an undercover FBI agent stepped in his way. Just then, Agent Ellison entered with a full FBI team. "Charles Howard Grayson," he said firmly. "You are under arrest for money laundering, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice." "Who?" Thomas screamed. "Dad, do something!" Charles snarled, backing away. "You think a bastard daughter can bring down everything I built?" I stepped forward, eyes steady. "No. But my father started it. I'm just finishing what he couldn't." FBI agents cuffed Charles, his face contorted in rage. Thomas was subdued moments later for interfering with law enforcement. As the last people filed out, I stood alone, facing the glowing screen. A photo of my father holding my hand in the park when I was 6 lit up the wall. I reached out, brushing the image softly. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. "I did it." But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the first door swinging open, leading into a legal war, a media storm, and the reckoning with a truth this country was about to face. King County Federal Courthouse, on a freezing winter morning, held a tension so thick it nearly pressed the air out of my lungs. I walked in gripping my father's journal like it was the only compass I had through the maze of power and deceit I'd been thrown into. Lily walked beside me, silent but unwavering. The front rows were packed with reporters, shareholders, and familiar faces who once bowed to Charles Grayson, now avoiding my gaze. The defendants were brought in. Charles wore a dark suit, but the arrogance had drained from his posture. Beside him, Thomas sat cuffed, pale. I recognized that look in their eyes. The dawning realization that truth can't be buried forever. The prosecutor began with solid evidence: forged financial statements, illicit wire transfers, stolen patents, recorded threats, and altered internal agreements. Each slide was a blade peeling back decades of polished deceit. "Our next piece of evidence," the prosecutor declared, "is the personal journal of Mr. Michael Grayson, a detailed account of his efforts to gather proof over 7 years. I was called to the stand. "Your name?" "Audrey Keller." "Can you tell the court who gave you this journal?" "Charles Grayson's youngest daughter, Lily Grayson. She found it in my father's office after he passed." "And do you confirm this was written by Mr. Michael Grayson?" "I recognize his handwriting. And many entries match events documented in his letters and audio recordings he left." The courtroom fell silent as I read the final line of the journal. "If I die, it won't be an accident. If someone holds this journal, use it to protect Audrey. I've been silent for too long." My voice cracked, but I refused to cry. When my father's last recorded phone call with Derek Hoyt played, his confession of being threatened and the looming accident, every eye turned to Charles. Then came the surprise witness. Roy Chandler, once presumed dead in a 6-year-old accident, now stepped onto the stand. In truth, he had been under witness protection after secretly collaborating with Michael. "I was the one who signed off on the fake patent transfers," Roy said. "Michael found out and had me record every closed-door meeting. I still have the originals." The room gasped. Charles shot to his feet. "This is lying. He's supposed to be dead." "Are you admitting to silencing a witness?" the judge asked coldly. Charles sat back down, but it was too late. The trial lasted 5 more days. On sentencing day, not a single seat in the courtroom was empty. The judge looked Charles Grayson in the eye. "You are sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole, for charges including federal bribery, money laundering, corporate fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." I gripped Lily's hand as the sentence landed. The room buzzed in disbelief, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Steady, because justice had finally arrived. The judge turned to Thomas. "For your cooperation in providing information leading to the principal arrest, you are sentenced to 15 years, with parole eligibility after 10. Thomas bowed his head, silent. Maybe for the first time, he understood what it cost to stand on the wrong side of truth. As I stepped down from the witness stand, Agent Ellison approached. "You changed the game. Not just for your family. For everyone Charles tried to bury." I nodded. "I didn't do it alone." Lily squeezed my hand tighter. I turned back one last time as Charles was led away in cuffs. No longer powerful. No longer smug. Just a man. Stripped bare before the truth. Dad was right. Truth was the one thing they couldn't buy. And I had reclaimed it. With everything he left behind for me. 3 weeks after the trial, I stood in the grand atrium of what used to be Grayson Holdings, now stripped of its old emblems, its legacy of fear and manipulation dismantled piece by piece. Beside me was Lily, and behind us stood a new generation of stakeholders, young inventors, returning employees, people once pushed to the margins. We had taken the company back. Not to walk the same path, but to rebuild it from the ground up. From this day forward, I announced at our first press conference, Grayson Holdings, as Charles Grayson built it, no longer exists. What once served corruption, control, and exploitation will now serve innovation, integrity, and community. I pulled the red velvet cover from our new logo. Applause filled the hall as Everlight Innovations lit up in clean, bold letters, replacing a name that once symbolized greed. We chose this name because real light never goes out, I continued, eyes fixed on the portrait of my father now mounted on the main wall. Because no matter how long it's buried, truth finds its way back. The road to rebuilding was brutal. We had to renegotiate nearly every contract, vet the entire staff list, and cut off dozens of murky relationships. More than 200 employees resigned once they learned the backdoor perks of the old regime were gone. I had no regrets. With every difficult decision I signed, I thought of my father, the man who shielded me from the shadows, at the cost of his life. I knew he'd be proud. Lily, nearly a decade younger than me, showed strength far beyond her age. She led the human resources overhaul, creating a culture grounded in collaboration and ethics. I want to turn the building that once terrified my father, she told me, into a place where people can dream big, without fearing their dreams will be stolen. We dedicated 60% of our first-year profits to establish the Michael Grayson Grant, a fund supporting independent inventors and public school engineering students nationwide. In just 2 months, over 1,200 applications poured in. One of the earliest was a high schooler from El Paso, who built an air filtration device using plastic waste. I personally called him to say he'd been selected. His voice trembled. "Thank you. I didn't think someone like me ever had a chance." "It's people like you," I said, "who are the real future of this country." The press was skeptical at first. Some outlets dubbed me the woman romanticizing justice, claiming our model couldn't survive in the real business world. But by the first quarter, Everlight's revenue was up 38%. Thanks to expanding our innovation network across Washington and Oregon. We partnered with universities, post-COVID abandoned startups, and retired engineers eager to give back. We transformed the 14th floor into an open lab space, where young inventors could prototype for free, receive mentorship, and have their IP protected from day one. One late evening, I stood in what used to be Charles's office, now mine. The room had been repainted a soft ash blue. The heavy mahogany desk was gone, replaced with a simple glass one. On the bookshelf sat my father's journal, secured in a display case. Lily entered with 2 glasses of wine. "For him," she said, raising her glass. "For everyone who was forced into silence," I added. We clinked glasses, and I felt it, not an ending, but a beginning. One not weighed down by the ghosts of power, but carried forward by what Charles Grayson never understood. Trust, integrity, and a legacy built not on fear, but light. 9 months after the trial, Everlight Innovations was no longer a newcomer in the industry. We had done what many said was impossible, fully compensating all 68 individuals and businesses harmed by Charles Grayson and his former regime. We didn't mail checks. I invited each person to our headquarters, not to hand out gifts, but to listen. Each one carried a vivid story of loss, resilience, and unfinished dreams. A doctor who lost her clinic after refusing to sell her patent to Grayson. A former engineer whose reputation was destroyed so Charles could steal his research. I looked each of them in the eye and said only one thing. "I'm sorry. On behalf of an entire system that failed you." We returned assets, added interest, and offered non-refundable seed funding for those wanting to restart their projects. Many cried. Some stayed silent, but all of them held my hand tightly. Lily, in her quiet strength, established a mental health support fund, Everlight Restore, for those emotionally devastated by their battles with the former company. No press, no credit. She left just one line in our internal memo. We don't heal with profit, we heal with decency. At the same time, we launched The Foundry, a national platform supporting independent inventors. Everlight's tech team built an app that allowed engineers, students, farmers, even everyday tinkerers to file for intellectual property protection in under 72 hours. The Foundry spread faster than expected. In just 5 weeks, over 8,000 ideas were registered, from climate sensors for farms to energy solutions for electric wheelchairs. A group of high school students in Nebraska even invented a low-cost biodegradable plastic. I flew there to deliver the funding myself. Standing in the school gym, surrounded by cheering students and teachers, I said, "My father believed good ideas can come from anywhere, not from power but from heart." That night, returning to Seattle, I found my mother sitting in her old living room chair, thumbing through a frayed family album. On the table were 2 cardboard boxes, one dated 2003, the other, hand-packed by my father in 2011, never sent. "Harry wrote to you all those years," she said, voice tight. "But he was afraid you'd never forgive him." I opened the box. Inside were over 20 letters. Each began the same way. "Audrey, if you're reading this." One described a Montana sunset during a business trip. Another said, he cried after seeing my college graduation photo online. And one, I read it slowly. "If someday you're able to rebuild what I lost, use your name. Not Grayson, your name, Audrey Keller, because you are the most beautiful legacy I've ever had." I hugged my mother without words. The next day, I returned to the office and requested a new sign be installed at the main entrance. Not just Everlight Innovations, but a line underneath. Inspired by Michael Keller. We also reconnected with those who once stood by my father, Roy Chandler, Derek Hoyt, and the retired engineers who had been forced out. Not only did they return, they became senior advisors for the Foundry. Michael once told me, Roy said in a boardroom meeting, that the next generation doesn't need to be led by money. They need to be led by belief. You've done exactly that, Audrey. For the first time, I no longer felt alone. The network my father once dreamed of had come alive, strong, united, and driven by a single mission: to protect those who dare to think differently and create good in the world. As the sun set over the Everlight building, I stood by the window, holding a photo of my father smiling. Not in a corporate suit, but in a t-shirt. Standing in the apple orchard behind our old house. I smiled back. I thought I had known everything about my father, about the quiet years he spent fighting, the evidence he gathered, the sacrifices he never voiced. But on a March afternoon, when a records clerk called to say a personal safe, registered under the name Michael Keller, had been discovered behind a false wall in an old Grayson Holdings warehouse, I knew there was still something he wanted to leave behind. The safe was modest in size, hidden with intention. I went with my mother and Lily. It required both a code and a fingerprint to unlock. Inside, everything was arranged with almost reverent care. There was a mahogany box, engraved with the words, "For Audrey, if you find light in the ruins." I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 silver hand-engraved lockets, each shaped like a small star nested in a celestial circle, resembling a personal star map. On the back, "There's always a way home." One locket already held a childhood photo of me. The other frame was left empty. My mother gasped through tears. "Had them made in 2006, she whispered. "That's when he planned to see you again. But then," her voice cracked, "he was afraid he'd only hurt you more." I gripped the locket, feeling the cool metal, heavy not from weight but from all the years of unspoken love it carried. Below the box was a stack of documents, each page handwritten by my father, outlining a detailed plan not only to expose Charles, but to rebuild the system he once believed to be untouchable. "If you're reading this, then you've done what I could not," the first line read. "But Everlight shouldn't just be a company. It must be a shield for those who were silenced by the very hands that forced me quiet." He had mapped out partnerships with public technical universities, secret scholarships he'd funded for nearly a decade. There was a list of people blacklisted by the industry simply for opposing Charles, with a note: "These should be the first people invited back." In a smaller envelope was a file labeled Aurora Project, a dedicated tech center for women engineers. My father had written, "If the next generation of women can create without being dismissed or excluded, then I'll know my life meant something." That evening, we returned to Everlight's headquarters. Lily stood in the central office, with the Aurora file in her hands. "I want to make this real," she said. "And I want it to carry his name." I nodded. Not just his name, his spirit. 3 months later, the Aurora Center opened in Denver, Colorado, the city where my father began his career. On opening day, I wore his locket, and Lily wore the other. Together we cut the ribbon in front of hundreds of female STEM students, retired professors, and those my father had quietly helped over the years. "Michael Keller wasn't just a father," I said at the podium. "He believed in the power of small people with big ideas." Today, we carry that belief forward, not in promises, but in practice. After the ceremony, my mother handed me one final letter she had kept all these years. It was handwritten, carefully sealed, and marked, "To Audrey. If you find your own way." I read it alone in my office. "My daughter, I'm sorry you had to walk so far without a guide. But that's why you became exactly who I always knew you could be. Strong, steady, uncompromising with the dark. I never wanted you to be anyone but yourself. And if you ever feel alone, remember, you carry the light, not just from me, but from everyone you've helped rise again. Never doubt your worth. I have always loved you." Michael Keller. I folded the letter and placed it in the left-hand drawer of my desk. After everything lost, I no longer searched for endings. That morning, sunlight streamed through the glass facade of Everlight's high-rise headquarters like a silent reminder. Some wounds need time, but some ideals must begin before they ever fully heal. I stood outside the main conference hall, where the National Technology Ethics Summit was underway. For the first time since the Charles Grayson scandal, a private company had been invited to host, and Everlight was chosen. Not because we were flawless, but because we had risen from the wreckage, left by those who once abused power. The hall was full. On stage, the Everlight logo glowed in soft white, with a new tagline beneath it. "Ethics isn't a choice, it's the foundation." I began with a story. I was once a name erased from my own family records. I stood in court and no one called me my father's daughter. But from that very place I learned, titles don't define worth. Truth and courage rewrite history. Applause followed. But I didn't stop for applause. I spoke about the changes Everlight had implemented, our open governance model, the internal whistleblower protections, and quarterly transparent financial disclosures. A practice no private tech firm had ever voluntarily adopted before. "We're not building an empire," I said firmly, "we're building trust." Then Lily took the stage to share the progress of the Aurora Incubator, where hundreds of inventions were now being tested in the real world. She didn't give a long speech. Instead, she played a short video, young Latina girls in Texas, building robots from recycled parts, captioned simply, "Sponsored by Everlight." As I stepped off the stage, I saw Roy Chandler, the former engineer ousted by Grayson, waiting in the back row. "You once said my father wasn't just an engineer," I said. Roy smiled. "And today, you proved that true. Not with words, with how you live." On the way back to my office, my phone buzzed. An email from the Department of Commerce. A formal invitation for Everlight to be a lead partner in a new federal program for sustainable innovation. I replied with just 2 words. We're ready. But even as recognition came, I never forgot. This journey wasn't just about justice for my father. It was for the thousands who were forced into silence, who had to choose between career and conscience. And we, the generation that followed, had a duty to choose differently. To choose right. That evening, Lily invited me and my mother for dinner at the former Grayson family apartment, now transformed into a community residence for young women in STEM. The kitchen still had its warm glow, but it no longer harbored secrets. Now it sparked workshops and mentorship circles. After dinner, my mother handed me a sealed box. This was found in the second secured safe in Montana, addressed and postmarked in 2002. The day you graduated high school. Inside was a USB, converted from a VHS tape. I plugged it in. Grainy footage appeared. My father in a winter coat, standing in a snowy field. Wind howled. But he looked straight into the camera. Audrey, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but if you do, it means you've gone further than anyone in this family ever dared, and I hope, even if someday you feel lost, you'll remember, the light doesn't come from outside. It comes from you. The screen faded to black, but I sat still. Not from grief, but from knowing that, after everything, I was exactly where I needed to be. Everlight still faces challenges. We continue to stand against old-world corporations trying to buy us out or steer us off course. But now I know. Real values aren't for sale. We don't need to win every battle. We just need to stand firm. We just need to do what's right. Because real light is when you look in the mirror and know you haven't compromised. And for me, Audrey Keller, this journey is only beginning. Audrey Keller's story proves that justice isn't just handed down in courtrooms, it rises from the courage to confront darkness. Once erased from her own family, she became a symbol of rebuilding. Not through vengeance, but by redefining power itself. Ethics, transparency, and compassion. In a world where trust feels increasingly rare, Audrey's journey reminds us that truth, when defended with love and will, can reshape an entire generation. What are your thoughts on Audrey's journey and the legacy she's built? Share your reflections in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful, real-life stories about family, justice, and renewal. If there was ever a moment powerful enough to rip apart a child's inner world in less than 5 minutes, it was that evening. I still remember the dim yellow light of the living room, like the pale skin of someone on their deathbed, and the faces of my parents. So calm, they were cold. When they uttered 3 simple words. We're getting divorced. No tears, no yelling. Just a suffocating silence, like I'd just been told I'd be exiled to another planet forever. I was 12 years old, and that night my childhood was officially buried beneath the tiled floor. They told me everything would be okay, but they never had to live in the chaos they created. I did. My mother, Evelyn, sat cross-legged on the sofa, gripping her favorite ceramic mug like she was about to announce a store-wide sale. My father, George, sat at the other end, head down, fidgeting with his shoelaces. Between them was a distance I had never noticed. Until that night. Leela, your mom and I want to talk to you for a moment. Her voice was light as air but cold as ice. I knew something was wrong. She had called me downstairs with no music playing. No snacks on the table, no signs this was a normal conversation. I sat down, my hands were freezing. Dad looked up and gave a strained smile. We're getting divorced. Those 3 words dropped like a hammer. Neither of them looked me in the eye. I turned to Mom, waiting for her to object, or at least shake her head. But she only nodded slightly. I didn't understand. They didn't fight. There were no screaming matches. No dramatic dish throwing like in movies. They were just strangers. Why? I asked, as a survival reflex. Because sometimes, adults no longer walk the same path, Mom replied like I was a kindergartner. Mom has a new boyfriend and Dad already met someone too, Dad added, like he was talking about changing lunch orders. I sat there, heart crushed into a metal box with no exit. Boyfriend, girlfriend, they hadn't said anything to me, they had planned, decided, built new lives. And I was the last to know. Dad said I'd be living with Mom but would visit him on weekends. Mom said I'd soon meet her new friend Kevin and his twin daughters. They're your age, Lila, you'll have someone to play with, she said, like I needed new dolls to make up for what was gone. I jumped up, the chair toppled back, and I screamed. I don't want new friends, I want my parents. I ran upstairs, slammed the door, and cried until my throat burned. I thought if I cried hard enough, loud enough, they'd change their minds. But my parents stayed downstairs, chatting quietly like two co-workers wrapping up a business deal. Less than a month later, Dad moved out. I never saw him pack. Everything disappeared on a Monday morning. I came home from school and his room was empty, like he'd never been there. Mom was different. She didn't hide anything. Kevin moved in the following week. His daughters, Clara and Beth, came along like living Barbie dolls. I tried. The moment they stepped into the house, I welcomed them. Hi, I'm Lila. I can show you the rooms. Clara, the taller one, blonde ponytail, looked me up and down. No need, she snapped. Beth, the other twin, added, we don't need a big sister. Big sister. That word felt like a slap. I never asked to be anyone's sister. I never wanted to share my mom. The following days were a string of shocks. My clothes were suddenly borrowed without permission. My belongings disappeared without a trace. Mom laughed and said, Lila, you need to learn to share, they're new here. I didn't argue. I just quietly kept a mental list of every item that vanished. When my 13th birthday came, I thought at least Mom would remember. But that morning she said in passing, the girls have a swim meet today, I need to take them early. We'll do your birthday tomorrow, okay? Tomorrow? There never was a tomorrow. Cake, presents, wishes, all swallowed by new friends, stepsisters, and Mom's new man. I looked in the bathroom mirror, trying to see the girl who used to smile every time Dad told bedtime stories. No one told stories anymore. Just me, lost, replaced, and forced to adapt to things I never chose. But I knew this was only the beginning. If anyone ever asked me, when did you stop feeling like your mother's daughter? I'd say, the afternoon I was kicked out of my bedroom because Beth didn't like the bedsheet color. I walked in after school, backpack still on, to see Clara spraying my room with Mom's perfume. Beth sat on my bed, bouncing her feet against the pillows like she was kicking me out of my own world. This room is disgustingly small, Beth declared, like an interior design critic. You should move to the basement. Mom says it's cooler and quieter down there. Clara sneered, her eyes daring me to argue. I turned to Mom, standing right at the doorway. I waited for her to say, don't be ridiculous, this is Lila's room. But she didn't. She glanced at me and looked away. You can sleep in the storage room, Lila, just for now until they get settled. Just for now? I slept in that basement for 6 months. Every night, listening to the leaking pipes, dripped like a countdown to my disappearance. I wasn't called big sister or daughter of the house. I was the extra. One afternoon I came home and saw Beth wearing my purple hoodie, the last birthday gift Mom ever gave me when I turned 10. That's my hoodie, I said, trying to keep calm. Beth smirked. Mom said if it fits me I can have it. I turned to Mom, who was stirring vegetables on the stove. Mom, that's mine. Drop it, Lila, your sister needs to feel welcome, don't be so selfish. I was speechless. Days later, I found all 3 of my journals torn apart, pages scattered in the trash. Someone had read them, destroyed them. No one got punished. I never wrote again. It didn't stop at Mom's house. Every other weekend, I still had to visit Dad. At the small beige house in the suburbs of Madison, where he lived with his new wife Louise and her teenage son Grady. Grady was 2 years older and sly like a fox, disguised as a teenager. I thought maybe I'd have a quiet space there, but the first night killed that hope. That night, while I was sleeping, I suddenly felt something crawl across my face. I screamed before I even opened my eyes. When the light flipped on, there was a huge fake spider sitting on my pillow. Grady stood at the door, phone in hand, recording my panic. She freaked out like a wet kitten. He laughed and ran off. I ran down the stairs, tears spilling, my heart still pounding. Louise came out from the kitchen, one hand on her hip. "What's all the yelling in the middle of the night?" "Grady put a fake spider on my pillow. I was scared." "Oh, for heaven's sake, it was just a joke. Kids being kids." "Do you really need to make such a fuss?" she snapped. I turned to my dad, hoping he would defend me, but he only sighed. "Louise is right, you need to learn how to control your emotions." I stood frozen between two adults who didn't even ask if I was okay. The following week things reached a breaking point. I came home from school and found 3 of my hand-drawn art pieces, ones I had been preparing to submit to my art class, ripped apart. I rushed to Grady's room and banged on the door. "Open up, I know you did it." Louise heard the yelling and dragged me downstairs. "That's enough, you think this is your house?" Yelling at my son like that. I broke into tears. "He tore my drawings, I spent a whole week working on them." "Lila, go to your room," my dad shouted, the first time he ever raised his voice at me. But I wasn't sent to my room. Louise pulled me into the old storage room next to the garage. A damp space with cracked walls and a moldy stench. "Sit here until you learn how to behave." She slammed the door shut. I was locked in there for almost 3 hours, no light, no voices. All I could hear were the cars passing by outside and Grady's giggles echoing from upstairs. After that night, I barely spoke to anyone. I became a shadow in both houses, forgotten, ignored. At my mom's house, I was the bother. At my dad's, I was the troublemaker. I tried to tell my homeroom teacher, but my mom came to the school, smiled sweetly, and said I had an active imagination, that I was just sensitive from the adjustment. I watched her sign the report with that fake smile only I knew the truth behind. I started skipping school, pretending to be sick, looking for any excuse to avoid going home. I stayed in the library until closing just to delay going back to the safe place everyone else imagined I had. One day, while I was sitting quietly at the park, a familiar voice called out, "Leila, what are you doing here all alone?" I turned around. It was Aunt Margot, my father's sister. Someone I'd never spoken to for more than 10 minutes. I burst into tears, unable to hold it in. I didn't know that moment, standing in an empty playground in her unexpected embrace, would be the first door opening to something I had never dared dream of. A real family. I don't remember how long I cried on her shoulder. My whole body collapsed, every emotion I'd bottled up over the past year, shame, anger, the fear of being forgotten, burst out like a dam breaking. She didn't ask questions. She just held me tightly, her hand gently rubbing my back with a tenderness I hadn't felt from my birth mother in so long. That same day I was taken to her home. Aunt Margot's house, or as I came to call it later, Aunt Sarah's house, was a small 2-story home on the edge of Racine, Wisconsin. Not fancy, not spacious, but from the moment I stepped in, I felt peace. Something neither of the other 2 houses ever gave me. Uncle Tom, Aunt Sarah's husband, was an orthopedic doctor. He was tall, serious-looking, but when he saw the state I was in, he simply smiled and asked gently, "Lila, do you like pizza or spaghetti? Tonight we're making whatever you choose." I froze. No one had ever asked me what I wanted to eat. At Mom's house we ate whatever she liked. At Dad's, I wasn't even invited to the table. That night, we made homemade pizza. Aunt Sarah let me pick the cheese and even wrote my name on one slice using tomato sauce. I laughed, a real laugh, after what felt like months. From that one dinner, I started finding reasons to stay at their place longer. I told them Mom was on a business trip, then said Dad was busy over the weekend. I made up stories about tutoring nearby, school holidays. Anything to avoid going back to the place where I felt invisible. Aunt Sarah knew. Uncle Tom knew too. But they didn't ask. They simply set up a room for me, bought an extra blanket, a desk, and a nightlight shaped like a fox. Because I'd once told them I loved foxes, as a kid. I didn't have to tiptoe. Didn't have to watch the clock to turn the lights off. Didn't have to quietly eat leftovers alone. I got to live. I started doing better in school. When teachers called home, no one snapped at me for interrupting during dinner prep. Aunt Sarah answered, took notes, even scheduled meetings with my teachers. Grandma Margot, Uncle Tom's mother, lived nearby. She was retired but still very active. She often took me on evening walks, telling me stories from her days as an EMT nurse. You know, once I stitched a wound during a hailstorm, she said. Really? Didn't it hurt? It did. But my patient was hurting more. So I braced myself, just like you are now. I asked her, do you think I can be strong like you? She smiled and said, sweetheart, you're already stronger than I ever was at 12. Time passed, and I slowly became part of their home, not loudly, but fully. I learned to fold my own laundry, helped cook on weekends, and washed the car with Uncle Tom. No one made me, no one ordered me. I did it because I wanted to. But then, what had to happen, happened. One Tuesday afternoon, Miss Rodriguez, my homeroom teacher, visited my mother's house as part of a routine school check. I wasn't there. When asked, my mother said, Lila's with her father this week. Ms. Rodriguez frowned. She had just spoken to my father that morning, and he had said I was living with my mother. The situation was immediately reported to Child Protective Services. 3 days later, I was called into the principal's office. A social worker was waiting. I thought I'd be scolded for running away, but they didn't blame me. Family court was scheduled 1 week later. I sat in a cold courtroom, my biological parents on opposite sides. Neither of them dared to look me in the eye. I can't take her in, my father said first, voice dry. My wife is about to give birth. We don't have the space. My mother scoffed. I work. I have 2 young daughters. I can't deal with Lila's issues on top of that. Issues, I, their daughter, was an issue. I clenched my fists, forcing back tears. But then, Aunt Sarah stood up, her voice rang clear in the tense room. Your Honor, I'm the sister of George, Lila's biological father. My husband is a doctor. I'm a middle school teacher. We're fully capable of raising Lila. Uncle Tom stood beside her, nodding. We don't have children, but if allowed, we would love for Lila to be our daughter. I turned to look at them. Their faces weren't afraid, they weren't hiding, they weren't calculating. Only love. The judge looked at me. Lila, you're old enough to state your preference. Who would you like to live with? I stood up, heart pounding like a war drum. I want to live with Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom. They're my real family. I looked over at my mom and dad. Neither of them said a word. They let out a sigh, as if they had finally let go of a heavy burden. After the hearing, I was issued a new birth certificate. My name was now officially listed in Aunt Sarah's household. From that moment on, I was no longer the child torn between 2 houses where no one truly wanted me. I had a home. I had people who called me their daughter. Their Lila. On the first night I officially became Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom's daughter, I sat at the dinner table and nervously asked, Can I call you Mom and Dad? Aunt Sarah burst into tears. Uncle Tom pulled me into a hug. We've been waiting to hear that for a long time. And just like that, for the first time after 2 years of hell, I was born again. Into a family that wasn't perfect, but was real. But I had no idea that this peace was only the calm before the biggest storm of my life. There's something strange that happens when you finally get to live in a real home. You start believing you deserve to be happy. And then, little by little, You begin becoming a version of yourself you never thought you could be. After being legally adopted by Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom, everything in my life began to shift. No more restless nights filled with shouting. No more awkward silent meals. No more suspicious stares waiting for me to mess up. I woke up each morning to the smell of baked goods Aunt Sarah made, and fell asleep after hearing Uncle Tom tell stories about surgeries he'd performed. I was no longer the outcast in someone else's home. I was Lila, their daughter. Grandma Margot, Uncle Tom's mother, now my grandma, became more important than I could have imagined. She came over every Wednesday afternoon, bringing old medical books and a bag of oatmeal raisin cookies. "I want you to try reading the first few chapters of this," she said, handing me a thick copy of Basic Anatomy. I was surprised. "You think I'll understand it?" She smiled. "I believe you won't just understand, it'll come naturally to you." And she was right. I became captivated by the detailed descriptions of the circulatory system, the way the heart functions, the different types of muscle tissues. What once seemed dry and boring suddenly came alive in my mind. I realized I wasn't just interested because Grandma liked it, but because I truly found medicine fascinating. I began excelling in school. From a child once labeled problematic at my old school, I became a top student 3 years in a row at Northridge High School. Aunt Sarah helped me set up a study plan and pinned it beside my desk. Uncle Tom bought me a miniature anatomical model to study anatomy. Every A I earned was celebrated with fresh baked chocolate cookies and a family movie night. No one forced me to study, they simply believed in me. And that belief made me want to try twice as hard. At 15 years old, I was chosen to represent my school in the state biology competition. I stood on stage, hands trembling like leaves, but when the spotlight hit me, I thought of only one thing. Grandma was sitting in the front row, and I wanted her to be proud. I won first place. My photo holding the trophy was printed in the school newsletter, and for the first time, I saw my name on the honor roll. That night, as we celebrated with ice cream, Uncle Tom asked, "Lila, have you ever thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" I didn't hesitate. "I want to be a doctor, like you, and like Grandma." No one laughed. No one said, "That's too hard." No one asked, "Who do you think you are to dream that big?" Aunt Sarah simply nodded, her eyes slightly wet. "Then let's make that dream come true, together." I threw myself into my studies. Up early to review, late nights practicing problems, weekends interning at a small hospital Uncle Tom recommended. Every step, someone walked with me. Grandma spent hours telling me about her toughest shifts back in the day. She told me not every patient would make it, but we had to give them the strength to believe they could. I wrote that down in my journal. It's not just about saving lives, it's about keeping the patient's hope alive. When college application season came, I sat with Aunt Sarah to fill out every line. We sent my application to the University of Minnesota, pre-med program, the school I had dreamed of since 9th grade. Waiting for the results was a stretch of anxiety-filled weeks. I grew quieter. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, afraid I wouldn't be good enough. "What if I don't get in?" I asked Aunt Sarah one night. She held my hand. "Then you'll apply again. And if not that, we'll find another path. You are not defined by a college gate, Lila. You're defined by your courage." The acceptance letter came on a rainy April afternoon. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Bold letters read, "Congratulations, you've been admitted to the University of Minnesota pre-med program with a full scholarship." I screamed, I cried, I hugged everyone tightly. Grandma gently touched my cheek, smiling proudly. I knew it, my granddaughter was born to do great things. That fall, I left for college. I didn't carry much luggage, but my heart was heavy. It was the first time I was leaving the home that had saved my life. Before I boarded the train, Grandma gave me a small wooden box. Inside was a black and white photo of her standing outside her old hospital in 1956. "Take this with you. Whenever you're tired, look at it and remember, you're continuing a dream." I nodded, tears in my eyes. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wouldn't be walking it alone. I was Lila, the daughter of Sarah and Tom, the granddaughter of Margot. And I was on my way to becoming a doctor, not just to heal others, but to heal myself. When you're in the most defining years of your life, those years that are supposed to be filled with hope and a bright future, life still has its ways of breaking you all over again. In the fall of my junior year of college, I got that call. The kind of call I thought would be routine, Grandma checking in on my classes. But it wasn't. Leela, you need to come to the hospital. Grandma Sarah? She didn't make it. Aunt Sarah's voice cracked like a snapped string. Just those words, and my whole world shattered instantly. I couldn't believe it. Grandma, the one person who had always been there for me, who had constantly taught me about love and the power of resilience, was gone. I couldn't picture life without her. I left my dorm room, rushing across campus, not even thinking about what I could lose. When I got to the hospital, Aunt Sarah was sitting beside the hospital bed, holding Grandma's hand. My Grandma Margot had passed in her sleep, peacefully and gently. But to me her death felt like a tsunami, washing away everything I had fought so hard to build. She will always be the one I look up to, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Aunt Sarah said nothing. She just nodded and held me tightly. There was nothing more to say. It was the biggest heartbreak of my life. Grandma, who had stood by me through the hardest days, was gone. Every morning she used to wake me up early and make me a simple, nourishing breakfast. She taught me how to be a doctor, not through textbooks, but through compassion and love. Now she was gone, and I had to keep living without her. At her funeral, in the thick silence of loss, I was given a letter she had written for me. When everyone had left the room, I stayed behind, alone in her quiet space. I opened the letter. My chest tightened as I read each word she had left me. My dearest Lila, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer with you. I've always known you'd go where your heart leads, and I'm proud of how strong you've become. But there's something important I need you to know. I'm leaving you everything I have. An estate worth nearly $2 million. You don't have to worry about your future anymore. Use it to build your life. But don't forget what I taught you about using your strength to help others. I believe in you. I couldn't breathe. $2 million. An enormous amount of money. She hadn't just left me with endless love. She had given me the chance to pursue my dreams without worrying about finances. But I also understood, this wasn't just a gift. It was a responsibility she entrusted to me. She didn't just want me to become a doctor. She wanted me to be someone who could change the lives of those who needed help. After the funeral, Aunt Sarah called me into her home office, where she often worked on lesson plans. Lila, you may need time to process all this, but we need to talk about what to do with the money. I sat silently, unable to speak. Everything was too sudden, and I didn't know where to begin. Aunt Sarah gently continued. You didn't just inherit Grandma's assets, you inherited part of her mission. You can't just think about yourself. I looked at her, eyes swollen from crying, but there was a steadiness in my gaze I had never noticed before. I understand, Auntie. I'll follow what Grandma taught me. I won't live only for myself. Aunt Sarah smiled and gave my hand a soft pat. Grandma would be proud of you, Lila. Now, you have everything you need to move forward. Don't forget, we're always here. With the inheritance from Grandma, I decided not only to continue my education but also to launch charitable projects to help low-income patients. People who couldn't afford medical treatment. To make that possible, I founded a nonprofit in Grandma Margot's name, the Margot Community Health Fund. Every time I look at her photo on my desk, I remember her words. Use your talents and your resources to help those around you. And I know. This is the path she wanted for me. Each day I felt myself growing. Not just as a medical student, but as someone who carried responsibility for others. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom supported me every step of the way, but I knew I couldn't have done any of this without Grandma's love and guidance. She may have passed, but what she left in me, love, resilience and duty, would stay with me forever. And I will never forget that she gave me more than a family, she gave me a purpose. Because I had spent so long in the shadows of emotional neglect, I didn't easily recognize the subtle signs when people entered your life only when they needed something. But this time, I did. It all started with a phone call on a Saturday morning as I sat in the office of my nonprofit preparing documents for a new project. "Hi sweetie, Lila, how have you been?" It was my mother's voice on the line, soft and gentle, as if nothing had happened over the past decade. I didn't know what to say. It had been so long since I heard her voice, and honestly, I hadn't expected this call. "Mom, it's been a while. Is everything okay?" I asked, cautiously. "Well," she said, "Bob and I are having a little financial trouble. His business is struggling, and I thought maybe if you could help us a bit, just temporarily. You understand, right? We're family after all." I froze. Family? I had severed ties long ago, and now she was using that word to lure me back in. "Mom, I think you can find help somewhere else, can't you? I've told you before, I'm busy with work and the foundation." There was a pause, then her voice returned, slightly firmer. "I just hoped you'd understand. I'm still your mother, and if family doesn't help each other, who will?" What I felt was a mix of anger and exhaustion. "I get it, Mom, but you have to understand. I can't help again. I have my own work, and I won't be used anymore." She didn't respond immediately. After a few seconds of silence, she spoke softly, like trying to appeal to me. "Well, it's fine, if you won't help. But I do hope we can at least meet. Maybe if we talk in person, you'll understand what I'm going through." Those words hit me hard. I realized then, this wasn't the first time my mother had tried to guilt me into helping her. Just as I suspected, her real motive wasn't family, it was money. I hung up, saying nothing more, but my heart felt heavy. The next morning, I got another call, this time from my father. At first, his voice sounded concerned, like when I was little and he wanted me to come home for the weekend. But this time, I could tell something was off. "Lila, how are you? Susan and well, we've been having some financial difficulties. I didn't want to bother you, but I figured you'd understand. We're family, right?" Again, the word family came up, but this time I was too tired to listen to the polished words. "Dad, what do you want?" I interrupted. I couldn't pretend not to understand his intentions anymore. "You know, Susan and I are struggling. I know we haven't talked much since you moved away, but if you could help us just a little, I'd never forget it." I felt like a wave was rising inside me. Never in my life had he spoken to me like this. "Oh. I don't understand why you think I can help. I'm no longer a child who needs your care. I have my own life. You should be able to manage yours." His voice started to break, as if he didn't expect me to say no. "Lila, I just hope you remember I did everything for you when you were young. We're family. We help each other. Can't you see that?" His words felt like a plea in the dark. But I wasn't that naive child anymore. "You want help because you're in trouble, but I won't be used like before. I'm not helping you anymore." I hung up firmly. After that call, I felt nothing but weariness. My parents only showed up when they needed money. But this time, I had learned how to protect myself. A few days later, I went to Aunt Sarah's house. Not for advice, but to let it out. She wasn't surprised when I told her about the calls. She just nodded quietly, looking at me with eyes that understood everything. "You know, Lila," she said, "real family are the ones who are there when you need them, not the ones who only show up when they want something." I nodded. Aunt Sarah was right. Whether or not my biological parents ever returned to me, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Tom and Grandma had always been my real family. The ones who never used me. The ones I could trust. "I won't let them use me again, Auntie. I don't need them to feel like I matter." Aunt Sarah smiled and gently patted my shoulder. "That's good. You deserve a life that's peaceful and free." My heart felt lighter than ever. I had realized that family means love and care, not people who see you as an opportunity. And I wasn't the weak little girl they once used as an excuse to manipulate. They thought one call, one suggestion, would make me return like a puppet, following their orders. But this time, I knew I had to stand my ground. The first call came from my mother. After I refused her previous requests for financial help, she kept texting and calling, trying to soften my rejection, but I didn't budge. "Lila, I really need you. We're family. You can't let me and Bob end up like this." Her voice trembled, like she was trying to stage an emotional performance. I listened, but I didn't feel even a sliver of sympathy. I was too tired of her lies, of her emotional manipulation. She had abandoned me for years, and now she was coming back. Only because she needed money. "You think I can help you like I used to, but I'm not your little girl anymore. You and Bob can figure things out yourselves. You don't need to lean on me." My voice was firm, unwavering. She went silent for a moment, then continued, as if she couldn't accept the rejection. "Lila, I did everything for you. Just help me this one time and I won't ask for anything else. Can't you do that for me?" Her voice was almost pleading, but I didn't hear truth in it. Every word felt like it was slicing into old memories. Memories of years I was abandoned. Of trying so hard to please her without ever receiving real care in return. "You weren't there when I needed you most. Now you don't get to ask for my help. I have my real family now, and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom are my legal parents." My words were cold, like a knife, but I knew I had to say them. This wasn't revenge, it was release. I didn't need to keep living in the shadow of the past, in the shadow of people who had left me behind. I hung up without hesitation, and after that I never received another call from her. Then my dad called. This time, I didn't give myself a chance to feel vulnerable. The moment I heard his voice, I already knew what the conversation would be. "Hey, Lila, I need your help. I heard about the inheritance and I figured you wouldn't let me and Susan struggle, would you?" I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for this call. After they found out I had money, he and my stepmom were bound to come back, like wild monkeys returning for what they wanted. But this time, I wasn't going to fall for it. "You need money, don't you?" I asked flatly, my tone emotionless. "You know, I don't want to bother you, but I'm having a hard time." Once again he was trying to pull at my sympathy, but I knew this game far too well. "You want me to help because you're struggling? I've heard enough." I cut in, my voice like a wall he couldn't pass through. "I'm not a child you can take advantage of. I'm not your little girl anymore. If you need help, you need to help yourself. I'm not your financial backup plan." I could hear the shock in his voice, but I didn't give him room to argue. "You'll have to find another way, because I will never be the easy option again. I'm not a child in your house anymore." I hung up, and a strange sense of peace washed over me. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel the need to explain. This was my choice. And it was the right one. But it didn't end there. A few days later I received a letter in the mail. From my mother. Inside were threats that she would take legal action if I didn't help her and my father. She wrote that I had an obligation to the family, that she would take me to court for failing to uphold my responsibilities and denying her rights. I read the words and felt nothing but emptiness. The only emotion left in me was exhaustion. "I'm not your daughter anymore. I don't owe you for your decisions. If you want to sue me, go ahead, but I will never come back." I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared of threats. My mother and father had failed to protect me when I needed them most, and now they wanted to use me for money? I didn't have to put up with this manipulation anymore. I mailed the letter back, stating that I had cut off all contact with both of them and wanted no involvement in any dispute. That was my final decision. In that moment, I felt like I had made a pivotal turn in my life. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom were my true family. They never asked for anything from me, but they were always there when I needed them. That is what real family looks like. I knew I couldn't change the past. But I could choose my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my parents, destroy that. Life isn't always easy, but after everything, I've learned that the most important thing is choosing who walks beside you. The people who love you, not the ones who use you. One autumn day, while I was sitting in my office at the foundation preparing for a new project, my phone buzzed again. I didn't think much of it. Unwelcome calls had become part of my routine. But this time, it was a familiar number. Jake, my half-brother. The story between us had gone unresolved for too long. Jake was someone I used to hate, but now, hearing his voice on the phone, I sensed something had changed. "Lila, do you still remember me?" Jake began, his voice soft. I paused for a moment. The feeling was hard to explain. I didn't know where to start. "Jake, why are you calling me?" I asked, still guarded. I want to apologize for everything in the past. All those years, I didn't understand how much I hurt you. I'm truly sorry. I've changed, Lila. I'm not the same naive kid anymore." A flood of emotions rose in me. Unexplainable, overwhelming. I could feel sincerity in his words, and for a brief moment, a part of me wanted to forgive, even if the past wasn't easy to forget. "I don't think I can forget everything, but you showed me something different. I can't go back, but maybe we can start over. As friends. Is that okay?" Jake was silent for a moment, then he let out a quiet laugh. "I won't let you down again. Thank you for giving me this chance." After that call, I felt a shift inside me. I didn't need to hold on to the anger forever. Jake had grown up, and I was no longer the fragile girl I once was. I'd learned that sometimes all it takes is enough courage to let go of the past, and you can start again, even with someone you once despised. A few months later, Jake and I started seeing each other regularly. We grabbed coffee, talked about old memories, and everything that had happened over the years. I began to see him as a real friend, and the distance I once felt started to fade. But then, one day, I got a message from Jake. "Lila, there's something I need to talk to you about. Can we meet?" I felt something wasn't quite right, but I agreed to see him. When I arrived at the cafe, Jake was already sitting there, looking a bit nervous. "Lila, I want to ask you something. Can you help Lily?" I blinked. "Lily? Our little sister?" Jake nodded, his face troubled. "She's struggling in school. No one in the family is helping her, and I think if you helped her, maybe she'd get a real chance to change her life." My heart sank. I remembered what it was like to fight alone, to feel abandoned. And I didn't want Lily to go through that. But part of me still hesitated. "Jake, I don't want to get pulled back into the problems of our old family," I said, feeling like my heart was torn in two. Jake looked at me, his eyes full of sincerity. "I understand, Lila. I don't want you to carry any more pain. But she's not like us. She's not a troubled kid, and she doesn't have anyone to help her. I'm just asking you to do one good thing." I looked into his eyes. And then, I realized, it wasn't because I owed anything to the adults from our past. It was because I could help Lily avoid the mistakes I had once paid for. "All right. I'll help Lily," I said, my voice steady. Jake smiled, his eyes lighting up. "Thank you, Lila. I knew you'd do the right thing." From that day on, I began helping Lily by setting up a small scholarship fund just for her. This fund would support her education, give her access to better opportunities, and I hoped it would give her a real chance to change her future, to step out of the shadow of the past. I knew this wasn't full forgiveness, and I still kept my distance from my mother and father. I didn't want to be dragged back into their calculating lives. But I also knew I couldn't let Lily go through what I had. Even if I couldn't be her family, I could be a good friend. And so, I continued building my life with the people who truly cared for and loved me. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Tom continued to be my support system at every step. I no longer felt alone. I knew that, even though I had been hurt so deeply in the past, I could still take control of my life and live according to the values I believed in. No one could break me anymore. And more importantly, I had learned how to choose kindness, but only for those who deserved it. Lila's story is a journey of overcoming pain and rebuilding a life from the shattered pieces of the past. From a girl abandoned by her family, she learned to stand tall, to choose kindness for the right people, and to use her strength to build a better future. Lila not only rediscovered her self-worth, but also inspired others by helping those less fortunate, proving that love and resilience can transform lives. How do you feel about Lila's journey and her brave decisions? Share your thoughts on this story or the character, and don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss the next powerful stories about life and family.